moment. And today we are hitting our fourth session of our Truth About Nutrition series, which is all about healthy eating patterns. Before we get started, as always, if you need or want any captions, we do have that option for you. That closed captioning button should be towards the bottom of your Zoom window. And depending on your device, you might have to hover over the bottom of your screen in order for that to pop up. But feel free to turn that on. And I'll just do a quick little introduction. So my name is Nikki Johnson. I'm an extension educator with North Dakota State University and the University of Minnesota, really focusing all around community health and nutrition. And I'm really excited to be talking to you today about healthy eating patterns. I am joined by my colleague, Mary.
Hi there, my name is Mary Schroeder. I'm Extension Educator for Health and Nutrition with University of Minnesota Extension, and I am housed out of the Wilmer Regional Office. And a lot of the work I do is also with community, but I have a special focus on early childhood and school-age nutrition.
Thanks, Mary. And we should mention both Mary and I are registered dietitians as well. So we've got a special love and passion for nutrition and healthy eating. So with that, let's really get into our session today, all about healthy eating patterns. And what we're going to talk about today, we're going to learn a little bit about just nutrition as a science, and then explore some components of a healthy eating pattern. And you will see not only just kind of some general components of what a healthy eating pattern looks like, but we're also going to give a few examples of some healthy eating patterns that have been explored and studied, and we know just a little bit more about. If you were a part of our call last week on popular diets, this is a really nice follow-up to that information, where we kind of explored different popular diets out there, kind of talked about the benefits, the pros and the cons. This is going to really be focusing in on the eating pattern side of things. So I think it'll answer a lot of the questions you maybe had from last week's conversation. So we've got our first question of the day. So if you could add into the chat, but what do you think about when you hear the word nutrition? Health, fuel, balanced diet, sustenance, fruits and veggies, health, food that nourishes your body, food, balance. Ooh, I'm loving all of these things. And I would say all of you are right. All of these words, all of these pieces really do fit into nutrition. But let's talk a little bit more about nutrition as a science.
Yeah, so when we talk about nutrition as a science, it is an area that is actually really quite new. We oftentimes talk about how it's in its infancy in terms of what we're seeing and learning, and just everything that we keep learning as we go. So the challenge with nutrition as a science is that it's hard to do, and it's kind of complicated because food is all around us. Food changes, it depends upon where we live, what we do, and all the different foods that we eat in the course of a day. So some things that make it hard to study nutrition are that it's hard to do those long-term studies. And I'm going to use myself as an example. When I was in college as a dietitian student, I participated in a research study that was looking at the impact of flaxseed oil on cholesterol. And we had to eat 5 muffins a day that were made with flaxseed oil, or not 5 muffins a day. For 5 weeks, we had to eat 2 muffins a day. And then we had to do that for 5 weeks. We took 5 weeks off, and then we had to do another 5 weeks with a different muffin that we would eat. And one of the challenges with food studies is you can't always guarantee what the quality of this food that you're going to research is. So we had to eat these 2 muffins every day for 5 weeks, and the muffins were awful. They did not taste good at all. And what they found is we had to keep food records in terms of what we ate. We had to write everything down so they knew, are they eating the muffin, but then also what does the rest of their diet look like? And what they found was that the muffins were so bad that people were eating all sorts of different foods with the muffin to kind of cover it up. So that was something that they found in their study that didn't work so well. So these nutrition studies are really kind of hard to do because unless it's in an extremely controlled environment, people are going to pick and choose other things to go along with them. So that's one thing that makes it a little bit hard. Where if it was just a pill that someone was taking, it's a little bit easier to control for all the different factors. Another thing is the cost to really do these long-term studies. If you're going to follow a group of people over a long period of time, it takes a lot to continue to do that research and to fund it. So it is hard to do those studies. And with the cost, unlike maybe like a pill or a medication, there's really not anyone that's going to get a lot of the financial benefit. Like, hey, if this medication or this pill works, we're going to see a big profit increase. If it's, just for a food, they're probably not going to see that. So that is one of the things that's tricky too. Therefore, it kind of relies on government or public health entities to kind of do that research. And again, there's not a lot of money towards a lot of that food research. And a lot oftentimes when there is money related to that food research, it may be sponsored by a specific food company. And then it gets a little bit trickier because, if you have a certain food product and you're doing a research project on maybe like how it impacts your bone health, and if you find that it's helps your bone health, some people might say, maybe that was biased, or maybe how you look at the research as a researcher might even be a little biased. So it's really hard to get that nice, pure research when it comes to food. So that's just something that's important to keep in mind, and why it is hard to see a lot of really well researched, rigorous studies in terms of food and nutrition. So the good news is there are a lot of good ones out there, but it is hard to do. And that's why things a lot of times we see that are changing. And we really kind of say we're really in our infancy in terms of what we're finding out about nutrition. I see someone asked, were there any results from the study? In terms of the flaxseed oil, they did find that it did help to improve cholesterol a little bit, but it wasn't a real significant study. So, and again, it was nice because I was a dietetic student at the time. So then the professors kind of talked a little bit about that study with us then like the following year after it was all done and complete. And they really did talk about that there were quite a few barriers to that study simply because the muffins didn't taste very good. And people were eating a lot of things to help cover up the taste of the muffin. So for those of you who are really interested in research, that could be something that they could have said, well, maybe they should have piloted the muffins a little bit more and made sure they really tasted good before they, had people eat all of those. And to this day, there's a certain spice in muffins that if it's in there, I can't eat it because it reminds me of those muffins. So, but it was kind of interesting. So. Okay, let's see. So when we do talk about different things related to nutrition, it is important to consider the sources that you're getting them from. You really want to make sure that you're taking things from reputable sources. I think a good rule of thumb, if it sounds too good, it probably is. A good place to look is like the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, kind of where that comes from. But things related to the Dietary Guidelines are really good, solid nutrition information. You can also look at some of your more well-known associations, such as like the Heart Association and the Dietetic Association, which is eatright.org. These are groups that spend a lot of time looking at nutrition in their research studies. So you can go to those also as good sources. But again, if it sounds too good, it probably is, maybe not a good thing to follow because if it's too easy, there's probably some type of gimmick or something related to it, which I'm sure Nikki talked about last week with the fad diets. Okay. So we're going to start with a fact or a myth. Food choice is the sole responsibility of the individual. Fact or myth? Okay. Actually seeing a little bit of a variety here, maybe more so than we've seen on some of the other questions. So some people say it's fact, some people say it is a myth. Okay, we'll let a few more kind of come in. Yeah, this is a real interesting one. So we actually have some variety on this one. And this is actually a myth. Food choices are influenced by a variety of different things: your social, your cultural, and your physical environment. So these things all play a role into your food choice. So it's hard for it to just be the responsibility of the individual. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why this is. There's a lot of different things that come into play in terms of our food choices. So we may feel like we want to make a right choice, but if our environment doesn't allow that, it's hard for us to actually make that choice. So let's look a little bit at how maybe our food environment has changed. In 1965, that was the first time that soft drinks in 12-ounce cans were actually dispensed at school. So that again makes it harder. Your choice might be like, well, I know I should maybe drink the milk, but this is here. And those influences then cause your brain to kind of say, I'm going to take this since it's a choice that's an option. In the 1970s, the 20-ounce plastic bottles were introduced. And if you think of the invention of this, it really made grab and go sodas much easier to do. You had a larger quantity, light, simple, could just toss them out, and people are grabbing and going those all the time. And also with the profit margins for those companies, it had a really nice profit margin. So they were making lots of money off of these sodas. In the 70s, we also saw the rollout of meals for children, such as the Happy Meals at different restaurants. And as a way to get kids to eat these more, they added toys to them. So here's where we start to see, how you market food can really make a difference to your food environment. So seeing those different things and, putting those toys in there makes a difference for kids, but even putting those toys in there makes a difference for adults. If any of you remember, I believe it was probably the late 1990s, the Beanie Babies were in some kid meals, and adults were like lined up to get those. So again, that food environment makes a difference. In the 1990s, that was when we talked was the low fat craze, and fat was bad. Anything we talked about, it was just everything, we could just blame it on fat. Fat was bad. So industry started to go along with that, and they had like fat-free Snackwell cookies. They were going to take advantage of that market, the people wanting things that were low fat. So those things started to become more readily available. And those things that we see in the store and in the media really do influence what we do choose. I like to say right now, today, food is basically everywhere. You do not have to go very far. And there is some place that either has, food you can buy, food you can get for free. Even within our houses, it used to be food was maybe just in the kitchen, but now we have, refrigerators on several levels. So we have easy access to that quick food. So, and in addition to that, easy access to food. If you look at this picture on this side, one thing that started probably about 5 years ago is even within our candy has been available in the grocery store for years, but now it's lit up. They have lights above the candy shelves to make it more enticing so that you feel more like you want to buy that. So again, there's different things that are all around us that are encouraging us to eat more all the time. So that does make it hard to follow some healthy eating patterns. In addition to our food environments, we also have what's called the social determinants of health. And these are things where we live, work, play that make a difference in terms of our food choices. Some of the things that come into play are economic stability, education access and quality, healthcare access, and then again, that quality of that healthcare, your neighborhood and built environment, and also the social and community context. I'm going to look at just a couple of these in terms of how it impacts food. So I look at economics. You can have healthy foods available, but if you can't afford it, it's not going to be something that you can do. So that definitely makes a difference in terms of what your food choices are. Also, the neighborhood and the built environment. Do you have a grocery store with lots of fresh fruits and vegetables handy that you can buy, and is it easy to get to? Or can you get to that store, but you can't afford them? That makes a difference. We also talk about that there's some areas that are just full of like fast food restaurants. Maybe that's your only option is to go to a fast food restaurant, which has very limited fruits and vegetables. Or maybe it's a convenience store that has just very limited options and that is high cost. So those things all make a difference. But we also have our social and community context too. And I think this is a real exciting place because this is where we're starting to see a lot more grassroots movement of how can we improve our social determinants of health? What can we do within our communities to take more control and do some different things. So for an example for that might be maybe you are in that community that doesn't have a grocery store that has a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables that people can afford. So maybe you start working together and talk to some farmers, and maybe you get a farmer's market started and you have some market bucks that are brought in to help support some of those different things. So it is really fun to see how communities are pulling together more to help make some really great things happen in their communities. So this is a really nice quote from the Institute of Medicine. It says, "It is unreasonable to expect that people will change their behavior easily when so many forces in the social, cultural, and physical environment conspire against such a change." So again, we can have the best intentions, but there's so many things that are wanting us to maybe make those less healthy choices. So that's why we really talk about what can we do as an individual and as a community to make those healthy choices the much easier choice. And this is something, people really can start to make little steps to help make these things happen. I think one example is if you go to like a sporting event, it used to be, it's pretty much just candy and maybe popcorn that was available and a lot of sodas that were available. If you go to a sporting event now, you can usually find some fruits or some nuts and yogurts. They're really making a much larger effort to have those things available. I like to talk about that in addition to having those things available, it's also good to make sure that you're purchasing those products too, to show them that, hey, there is an interest in making sure that there is healthy foods, because if the demand is there, that helps support the supply. Okay. So what are some of those other external factors that you run into that make it hard for you to make, or that influence the food choices that you make? If you just want to type those into chat. If you look at your typical day, what are some things that make a difference in terms of what food that you do choose? Pressure to eat from others. That's a good one. I know it's a lot of times we talk about in the Midwest, you get offered things 3-4 times, then you feel guilty if you don't take it. Stress, that's another big one. Oh, time, prep time. Oh, that's a popular one. Time, that's a big one. Liking candies. Advertisements, we see that a lot, and we see those now more and more just on our phones. We're getting those. Not being able to prep ahead of time. Social activity. Yeah. What goes well with red wine? Oh, just maybe not having the energy or being a little lazy. That's another thing too that influences those food choices. We could spend all day just talking about how our mood influences the food that we choose. So it's really interesting and fascinating. Okay. There's also a lot with nutrition confusion. This is kind of a neat little thing, especially now since it's tax season. In 2012, they polled some people and they said it's easier to do our taxes than it is to figure out how to eat healthy. Nutrition is very, very confusing. And even myself as a dietitian, I get confused on different things or how things are packaged. I remember once I was thinking I was buying something that was 100% juice. And then it was like several times later I bought it and I actually looked at the ingredient label and I'm like, oh, the first ingredient is sugar. And even again, myself, who has spent a lot of time looking at nutrition, totally missed that one. So it can be very, very confusing. And it does change a lot. When I first started practicing dietetics, that was during the fat-free craze. And I remember telling one gentleman when I was doing some nutrition counseling is that, don't eat nuts. You just never eat nuts. They're bad. They're high fat. You just shouldn't have them. But on special occasions, if you do want to have nuts, you can have a few nuts, but you just have, the palm of your hand, just a scant palm of your hand, and that's all you can have. And that is one thing that has completely changed. Now we talk about that nuts are good for us. They have a healthy fat for you, which you do need in your body. So it is interesting to see how the science has changed. And it is hard to keep up on, but we have a way to kind of help you do that. And that is with the dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines are from the United States Department of Health and Agriculture. They work together on this, and they really look at all the different things related to nutrition and science and pull together what are we going to recommend for our citizens to be eating. And the nice thing about this is they really do go and look at the science and try and figure everything out for us, because most of us either we obviously don't have the time or really the knowledge or interest to kind of look at all those different studies. So every 5 years, they pull experts together and they comb through all these different studies and they try and figure out what are the best recommendations on what has changed and just that new information that we found out. So our current dietary guidelines that we are following right now are the dietary guidelines from 2020 to 25, and they have some overarching guidelines, and that's follow a healthy eating pattern at every stage of life. This was the first time they actually included pregnancy and children under the age of 2 in the dietary guidelines, so that was exciting. Customize and enjoy nutrient dense foods. And I think that nutrient enjoy is such an important piece. Is someone had talked earlier about the pressure to eat or being stressed. And what I find a lot of times is we take the enjoyment out of eating. So bringing that back. So talking about let's really enjoy the food that we eat. And then focus on food groups and eating those nutrient dense foods, getting the most nutrition out of everything that we eat. And then just limiting the foods and beverages that are higher in added sugars and saturated fats and sodium. And then also limiting those alcoholic beverages. So those are kind of the key guidelines that we look at right now in terms of eating healthy in the United States. Just for those of you who are interested in learning more about nutrition or are really interested about the dietary guidelines, they just started the process of doing, this amazed me, the 25 to 30 dietary guidelines. And you can follow the whole process online. If you just Google dietary guidelines 2025, you can find out who's on the committee. You can actually listen to their conversations when they have their meetings. So if you're interested in learning more about, certainly go in and check that out. When we do look at the dietary guidelines for Americans, these are things that they are looking at. What can we do to lower the risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, obesity, and hip fractures? They do find that 80% of the chronic diseases, like some of the ones listed here, are diet related. So it is important that we kind of really look at what are some healthy eating patterns that we can follow to help reduce these risks. Okay. So what are some of those elements that you think might be part of a healthy eating pattern? If you just want to put those into chat, what do you think when we're going to transition now from the science a little bit more to what is a healthy eating plan? What are some of the different eating patterns? Eating breakfast variety, the MyPlate variety, we see that coming up quite a bit. Balance. Intuitive eating. I think we have some people who've been on these and have learned quite a bit for the last few weeks about some of the different things about that importance of variety. I see beans and legumes coming up there too. So portion sizes, good. Lots of great things popping up in there. Okay. So when we talk about healthy eating patterns, and as we go through a couple different patterns today, these are things that make up a healthy eating pattern. They don't restrict any specific food groups. They also choose balance and variety. You're going to want to choose high fiber, again, that nutrient dense, we keep seeing that. Sustainability, something that you can do over a long period of time. And they often include some type of social factors and movement. Okay. Nikki came up with this, and I really like this slide here. Focus on variety, and just all sorts of different colors on there. Choose a variety of different food groups, but then within those food groups, making sure you're getting a nice variety of fruits, vegetables, protein foods. Again, going for that nutrient dense. You think of that bold color. What can you get that really has lots of nutrition in it? And then finally, watching the amount, because you can have lots of variety, lots of foods that are nutrient dense, but if you overeat even healthy foods, that's going to cause weight gain and other problems. So, just like anything, don't overdo it. And again, the quality matters. We shared this slide with you a couple weeks ago, and we really thought it was another good one to bring up again, because you have carbohydrates in both of these. The cookies, you just pretty much get the carbohydrates, whereas with the fruits and vegetables, much more nutrient dense. You're getting a lot of different vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients with it. So definitely a place to go with that. Okay, so the first eating pattern we're going to look at is MyPlate. And if you are kind of new to wanting to maybe eat healthier, this is a really, really good place to start. So we have the different food groups, the fruits, the vegetables, the grain, the protein, and the dairy. And within these groups, we really do see how this plays out in terms of MyPlate and healthy eating plan. It doesn't restrict any groups. We have lots of options for balance and variety. Again, you can see it's not like fruits takes up 3/4 of the plate. There's a nice variety between all the different food groups. And we can really get a lot of high fiber and nutrient dense foods from these. with the MyPlate, they also do a nice job of just coming up with some simple slogans or things you can do to eat healthier. So focus on whole fruits, trying to get those whole fruits and again, a variety of those different fruits within there. Vary your veggies. I'm looking for some of those reds and oranges in addition to those dark green veggies. Making sure half your grains are whole, varying your proteins, and finally moving to a low fat or fat-free dairy milk or yogurt. So again, simple things that you can do to kind of get off to a healthy eating plan. We talked about amount too, and this is where MyPlate is nice. You can go to myplate.gov and you can get a lot of information on MyPlate and the food groups. One thing I like about it is you can actually start to get a more personalized plan, not super personal, but at least a little bit closer. You can get a MyPlate plan. So if you go to myplate.gov and then put in the MyPlate-plan, or they also have it, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can find it. You can put in your age, your sex, your height, and your weight, and your physical activity, and it will tell you about how many calories that you need. And then it's going to give you a plan. So for example, here's one that I just put in, and it's for 1,600 calories a day. And that works out to be about 1.5 cups of fruit, 2 cups of vegetables, 5 ounces of grains, 5 ounces of protein, and 3 cups of dairy. Okay, and then it has some sample ideas of how you might do that in your day. But again, it's a very good place to start with just some simple, nice, basic things to get started on. And again, really focusing on those food groups, making sure you're getting that variety to get all the nutrition that you can. Another nice thing about this website is that you can also go to MyPlate Kitchen, and let's say that you are really looking for some different ways to use some of those darker orange vegetables besides carrots. So let's say you want to increase your squash, winter squash. You can go in there, you can search by squash, and they'll give you all sorts of different squash recipes. Or maybe those beans and legumes. You can search a variety of different ways to get some different ideas of how to get those food groups into your diet.
All right, next up, we're going to talk about another healthy eating pattern, which is the Mediterranean diet. So we've got another fact or myth here. The Mediterranean diet encourages the consumption of healthy fats, especially plant oils. Myth or fact? This one was not as tricky as yours, Mary. I'm seeing lots of facts, and you would be absolutely correct here. So the Mediterranean diet emphasizes plant-based foods and healthy fats. So let's look a little bit into what the Mediterranean diet is. And just as a quick reminder before we start talking a little bit about this, when we think about healthy eating patterns, just like as Mary discussed with MyPlate, when we think about a healthy eating pattern, keep in mind, we're not restricting food groups. We're really thinking about balance and variety. We're focusing on nutrient dense foods, high fiber foods, and we also are thinking about sustainability. So the Mediterranean diet, what is it? So the Mediterranean diet is based on the traditional foods that people used to eat in countries bordering the Mediterranean Sea, places like France, Spain, Greece, Italy. And this diet has a major emphasis on eating plant-based foods. So fruits, veggies, whole grains, beans, seeds, nuts, those types of things. And when thinking about fats, it encourages those to choose plant-based fats, things like olive oil, canola oil. There's a major emphasis on using herbs and spices instead of salt to flavor foods. This is a shift for us in the US. When you think about it, a lot of our foods have a large quantity of salt in them as a flavor enhancer. However, in the Mediterranean diet, they're really focusing on those herbs and spices instead. As a part of the Mediterranean diet, there is also the recommendation to limit red meat to more than just a few times a month. So looking for a protein source that's coming from something that isn't red meat, fish, bean seeds, legumes, poultry, those types of things. And eating fish and poultry at least twice a week. I didn't get to that next line. As a part of the Mediterranean diet as well, it is recommended to choose water as the main daily beverage. They do allow for some moderate intake of wine with meals, but it is limited and it's not required. I always like to make that little asterisk. Water is the recommended beverage, but moderate intake of wine with meals was something that it is also built into this healthy eating pattern. So when I think about the Mediterranean diet, so plant-based foods, focusing on those plant-based fasts, what does that really look like? So the Mediterranean diet says to aim for 7 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. How many of you think you're probably hitting that? A lot of us really aren't. Okay, I saw a couple of shakes of head. I'm not either on most days, but that is the recommendation. And we'll tell you a little bit more about why that is in just a little bit. But this healthy eating pattern not only has these guidelines for you, but also focuses on shared values and a way of eating and living. So it focuses on values, a way of eating and living, rather than focusing on specific macronutrients and vitamins and minerals. And I think that's really interesting. So it really focuses on the lifestyle piece rather than specific nutrient pieces. So what do we know about the Mediterranean diet? Why is this included as a healthy eating pattern? And there are a lot of associated benefits that have been found to the Mediterranean diet. It benefits and might support brain function. It promotes heart health, can regulate blood sugar levels, and even more. Studies have even documented a decreased incidence of high blood pressure and diabetes, as I mentioned. And in one particular study of nearly 26,000 women, so this is a huge study, a study of nearly 26,000 women found that those who followed this type of diet had a 25% less risk of developing cardiovascular disease over the course of 12 years. So we have been able to see the science behind this. So if you think about it, it's talking about increasing those fruits and veggies and making sure that we are choosing a variety of food groups. It's not giving any restrictions. Again, we're able to eat all foods, but again, thinking about quality, thinking about quantity, and those types of elements. And because of that, we can see a reduction in risk for a variety of different chronic conditions. I'm going to move on to, we're going to skip that question for now, but might come back to it in a bit. So next one, our next diet on our list, our next healthy eating pattern on our list is the DASH diet, which is also known as the Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And fact or myth, this diet is only for individuals who have high blood pressure. I started to give too easy of questions again. No, I'm just kidding. I love that you were getting this right. This is a myth. So the DASH diet is a healthy eating plan that is beneficial for anyone with high blood pressure, but it's also for those who may want to prevent developing high blood pressure. So what is it? The DASH diet or healthy eating plan is a flexible and balanced eating plan that helps to create a heart-healthy eating style for life. What's great about this and kind of falls into, the MyPlate as well as the Mediterranean, but it requires no special foods. Instead, it really provides daily and weekly nutritional goals to maybe aim for. So in this plan, it's recommended that you eat vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, include fat-free or low-fat dairy products, lean proteins like fish, poultry, beans, nuts, things like that, limiting foods that are high in saturated fats, such as those fatty meats or even full fat dairy products, and even tropical oils like coconut oil. Limiting sugar sweetened beverages and other sweets, and choosing foods that are lower in sodium. And I almost should have highlighted that bottom one. The sodium piece is definitely a major component to the DASH diet. So in addition to these kind of general guidelines, the DASH diet does give some ideas about foods to choose more often or to be thinking about, and that's going to be foods rich in potassium, calcium, magnesium, fiber, and protein, and choose foods less often that contain a lot of saturated fats and sodium. So you might be wondering, okay, I have no idea what kind of foods have the potassium and the calcium and those types of things. So we wanted to give just a few examples of foods to choose if you're thinking about the DASH diet or that DASH eating plan. So potassium is a nutrient of focus. Some things that you would find, or some foods that you would find potassium in include leafy greens, nuts, dairy, potatoes, bananas, all kinds of those, if you notice, fruits, veggies, as well as some of our leaner protein foods. When we think about calcium, great sources of calcium are going to be things like our dairy products. So milk, cheese, yogurt. Again, opting for the lower fat or fat-free options over the higher fat or full fat dairy products. But if you're not a big dairy fan, there are other options for you to choose from as well, including winter squash, edamame, soy, and canned fish with bones. I don't know how many people opt for canned fish with bones, but I wanted to include it on the list, at least. So very calcium-rich foods. They also mention including foods that are higher in magnesium and fiber. Magnesium-rich foods are going to include whole grains, leafy greens, beans and legumes, as well as our dairy foods. And I know that we had an entire webinar all on fiber and the benefits of that. But so when you're thinking about fiber-rich foods, whole grains, fruits, and veggies fall to the or go to the top of the list. So if you notice, there's a little bit of a pattern or some repetitiveness that you're seeing maybe in these foods that are rich in magnesium, rich in calcium, rich in potassium, and are also rich in fiber. And that's leaning heavily on those fruits, veggies, and whole grains. So what should we be eating less of? So the DASH diet recommends eating less saturated fats, sodium, and added sugars. We shared earlier that healthy eating patterns don't eliminate foods, and that is very much true of the DASH diet. The DASH diet does not eliminate fats or sodium or sugar, but it simply recommends eating less of these foods. So why might that be? Well, studies show us that the DASH diet can lower blood pressure. I mean, it's in the name of the eating pattern itself, but it can lower blood pressure. And what's cool about this, it can lower blood pressure in as little as 2 weeks. That's pretty quick. If you're able to follow this healthy eating pattern, making sure you're getting, lots of fruits and veggies, you're looking at the whole grains, you're working on limiting the saturated fats, the sodium, the added sugars, you can see the reduction in blood pressure in as little as 2 weeks. In addition to that, the research also tells us that you can lower your LDLs or your low density lipoproteins, and those are the bad cholesterol in your blood. So when we can reduce that high blood pressure and high cholesterol, those are two major things that play into heart disease and stroke. So if we can lower our risk of blood pressure, or lower our blood pressure, lower those LDLs, we're really doing a lot to protect our heart health. In addition to that, we have also seen through research that the DASH diet can reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes and, as mentioned, heart disease. One thing I did want to point out with the DASH diet, if you really focused in on reducing the sodium level to 1,500 milligrams or less, which is very difficult. This is definitely something I recognize. But if you were able to get to that 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day or less, you're going to note that studies will tell us that the diet is definitely more beneficial. So beneficial all around anyways, but if you can really lower that sodium level, even better. Next up, fact or myth. A vegetarian diet is not considered a healthy eating pattern because it eliminates a food group. I love this. Okay. It is a myth. Way to go, everyone. A vegetarian diet does not eliminate a food group. Oftentimes, we might think that it does eliminate a food group simply because an individual chooses not to eat animal or eat meat. But in reality, the protein food group contains a lot of non-animal protein options. Additionally, some vegetarian diets even include things like dairy, eggs, or potentially even fish, all depending on which vegetarian diet is chosen. So, what is a vegetarian diet? Well, a vegetarian dietary pattern can be achieved by incorporating protein foods from all different types of plants. There are a variety of different options out there, including vegan, an ovo vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian, lacto-ovo vegetarian, pescatarian, and flexitarian. And you're probably like, oh my gosh, Nikki, I don't know what this all means. That's okay. Let's talk a little bit about it. What I really wanted to point out here is that there isn't just one vegetarian dietary eating pattern. There's a mix of them. And I think that kind of highlights the flexibility of a vegetarian diet. So let's look at each of these different pieces, or each of these different options for a vegetarian diet. So vegan is one that I think I've definitely heard a lot more about in, the last several years. But a vegan diet is the strictest form of a vegetarian diet because it eliminates all animal products and byproducts. So not only are they saying, okay, no, I'm not going to have beef, but they're also saying I'm not going to have milk. Anything that comes from the animal, they will not be consuming. Oftentimes when an individual chooses a vegan diet or a vegan eating pattern, it's not just because of the health or nutrition factors, but it also involves elements beyond the food choices. So a lot of times it's not just, hey, I'm going to stay away from these animal food products, but we're also going to be staying away from anything else that you could purchase, whether it's clothing or furniture or something else that would would affect an animal of some sort. So elements beyond the food choices. But one thing to keep in mind with the vegan dietary plan is that it does require a lot of focus and diligence in obtaining enough protein. As mentioned, you can definitely still follow a vegan eating plan and get enough of your protein in, but it's a little bit trickier simply because they are eliminating all animal products. The ovo vegetarian is one where you are excluding meat, poultry, seafood, and dairy. However, ovo vegetarians will eat eggs and egg-containing foods. One thing that they need to be cautious of is to make sure that they're consuming enough calcium because they're eliminating those dairy products. A lacto-vegetarian does not eat meat, poultry, seafood, or eggs, but will consume dairy products. And they have to be cautious about eating enough fiber. Lacto-ovo vegetarians include meat, poultry, and seafood, and will consume the byproducts of animals such as eggs and dairy. One thing to point out about these two, or this type of vegetarian, while they are eating the byproducts of animals such as those eggs and dairy, they are very mindful of animal treatment. So as I mentioned, a lot of times when people decide to follow a vegetarian eating plan, they're thinking beyond food choice and thinking about the treatment of animals and whatnot. And finally, probably the most flexible or inclusive vegetarian diets are going to be the pescatarian and flexitarian. So if you are a pescatarian, you are choosing to not eat meat or poultry, but will consume fish and seafood. A lot of times they'll also eat eggs and dairy, but something to note is that there still is that prioritization of different plant foods, the fruits, the veggies, the whole grains, beans, seeds, legumes, those types of things. As a flexitarian, again, this is probably the most generous and flexible of the plans, kind of says it in the title there. But there's really a focus on foods that can be included. We're not eliminating any specific foods. There's really a focus on the things that you can have as a part of a flexitarian diet. There is still that prioritization of plant foods. Oftentimes there's emphasis on choosing protein that does come from plant sources the most often, but flexitarians also enjoy animal products on occasion. Something else that's included as a part of a flexitarian diet is limiting those added sugars, and they aim for minimal processing. So choosing those more whole foods that are in whole form rather than a processed form. So having the whole orange versus the orange juice, because they know the health benefits of that. Something I like to point out with vegetarian diets, people automatically assume a lot of times that a vegetarian diet means you're going to be the healthiest. However, you have to be cautious about the food choices that you're making, even within a vegetarian diet, because guess what? A donut might be vegetarian. However, we know that a donut maybe isn't going to help you to reach your health goals that you're hoping for. Just a couple of notes here on a vegetarian diet in pregnancy and lactation, or even in young children. So a well-planned vegetarian diet can definitely meet the nutritional needs of people from all stages, including those that are going through pregnancy, lactation, or even childhood. But it's about making sure you get the nutrients that you need. So people in these life stages may need to take special care to ensure that nutrient adequacy. So iron might be something that they really need to focus on. B12 might be something that they really need to focus on. But I know sometimes we might get a little bit worried if we've got a niece or nephew or a grandchild or something where their parents have decided that, hey, we want them to follow this vegetarian diet. Rest assured, it can be done healthfully. It can be done very well. It just means that those parents are probably focusing more in on some nutrients that maybe we wouldn't need to be thinking about for those of us that are following a different type of eating pattern. One final note on the vegetarian diets as far as food choices are vegetarian plant-based bread or beverages. So that might be soy milk, almond milk, things like that. If you're choosing to avoid cow's milk and things like that. The biggest thing that we encourage as far as these plant-based beverages is to make sure that you're checking the nutrition facts label because the protein content isn't always the same as cow's milk. So check that nutrition facts label for protein, check it for calcium to see if it's comparable, because if you're using this as a source of protein, we want to make sure you're getting enough. And finally, the research. So why does this fit into a healthy eating pattern? Well, it is consistently shown that individuals who follow a well planned out vegetarian eating pattern, you can reduce body weight. Also, depending on the type of vegetarian diet that you're following, we can see our bodies better able to use the insulin in which we use to help to reduce our blood sugar. It lowers our risk of chronic disease, such as cardiovascular disease, as well as type 2 diabetes. So again, the research is there telling us that this is a viable option for a healthy eating pattern. It's sustainable, it's not eliminating food groups, and it really focuses on variety. So curious, I know we're going over time, so I apologize if you have to leave. We totally get it. We will send out the recording, but curious to know what eating pattern interests you the most and why. Love to see that in the chat. Add that to the chat. What eating pattern interests you the most and maybe why? And as just a final reminder, so the reason we really were focusing in on these different diets, if you will, is because it really falls under an eating pattern more so than a restrictive diet, because we're not restricting food groups. Each of these different plans incorporated and focus on balance and variety. It encouraged participants or individuals to choose foods that were really high in fiber. They're very nutrient dense. They're sustainable. It's something that you could do this week, next week, and even next year. And often did include social factors as well as some movement, even if we didn't get to touch on that nearly as much. So you might be wondering, okay, now what? What if I'm not following one of these healthy eating patterns? That's okay. What we encourage you to do is, if you're interested in making some changes, is to simply start small. You don't have to say, tomorrow I'm starting the DASH diet and I'm going to follow every single bit step by step. We know that can be really overwhelming. Instead, start with one small change that you're willing to make. Practice it for a week or two. Get comfortable with it. Write down how it's going, what you might need to change. Celebrate that progress. And then as you are getting more comfortable with that one small change, start in with the next one. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. little elements or little pieces at one time can make a huge difference. Okay, so with that, we have an opportunity for you to receive a certificate of participation, as well as some well-being points. And to do that, I'm going to add it into the chat here. All you have to do is follow the link included in the chat. It is a short end of a webinar evaluation. What we're going to ask you to do here is going to ask a series of questions. What webinar did you see? You took part in the What's for Dinner series today, and you can select on there that, hey, I would like to receive well-being points, and you should get a notification of that within a couple of weeks, if not sooner. Additionally, if you're interested in other webinars, just know that we have a variety of options there for you. And of course, if you're looking for other information, engage with us on any of the following platforms listed here. And just know that if you are wanting to look back on this or you want some more information, we will send out a link to the recording. I also plan to include a couple of additional handouts for you to look at about each of those healthy eating plans that might help you to answer any questions that you might have. And with that, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah. Nikki, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I thought I would just answer orally instead of typing them in because they're a little easier to explain. So someone asked a question about, is non-GMO organic better than having the GMO or the non-organic? And all of those different combinations can fit into a healthy eating plan. It nutrition-wise about the same. It really just depends upon personal choice with that one. There was also a question on yogurt, some really good conversation happening about yogurt. So the recommendations are for a low fat or fat-free yogurt. And then the question was, we look at the labels for those and a lot of those are super, super high in sugar. And yes, that is definitely true. And that's where you really have to really pay attention to the labels and compare the different yogurts and find, if you choose to want to decrease your added sugar, you're going to want to find one that is lower in sugar. I do think it will be interesting in this next round of the dietary guidelines that they're looking at right now to see what happens with some of the recommendations related to dairy, because they are starting to find that, maybe some of the regular dairy, not necessarily the fat-free or the low fat, but they do have healthy fats in them. So we might start to see some changes over time with some of the recommendations with dairy. Again, it remains to be seen, but that is something I'm starting to hear. I don't know, Nikki, you're kind of nodding your head too. So again, that's what's kind of cool about those dietary guidelines is we do see those changes over the course of time. It might not happen right away or might not ever happen, but it's nice they actually really look at that research. And I do know some of the yogurt companies are starting to decrease their sugar just because, again, consumers are starting to be more aware of that. And now that they have the added sugar on the nutrition facts, it makes it much easier because milk in and of itself contains some natural sugars. So it helps now that they do say added sugars because you can really look at that. To give you an idea, 4 grams of added sugar is equal to 1 teaspoon. And I know I've seen some that have like 12 grams of sugar or more in them. So you can easily kind of compare and gives you an idea about how much added sugar is in there. So I don't know, Nick, if you have anything else to add about the sugar
It's
or the
just kind of
yogurt.
cracking me up because I honestly had this conversation on an earlier call today. It just came up really organically, and a coworker and I were discussing different yogurts and whatnot. And I happened to pull up the yogurt that I choose for my family. I apparently did not read the label. It had 35 grams of sugar in a cup, which I guess I'm not consuming 1 cup at a time. However, I was like, oh my goodness. I was a little bit surprised. I obviously know that some of our yogurt foods definitely have a higher sugar content, but it definitely took me by surprise. So I love the conversation about the sugar. I would say, if people are looking to make sure that or looking for a lower sugar option, I know a lot of people kind of pointed out that non-fat plain yogurt. If you do the non-fat plain yogurt and adding in some of your own fruit, well, it does increase the sugar, right? Because fruit naturally has sugar. You're going to see the added benefits of the fiber that's included with the whole fruit, as well as the additional nutrients that are going to be in your food, your fruit foods. So you can still kind of get that sweetness, but you're going to get the added health benefits along with it too. Were there any other questions, Mary?
Yeah, there's a question that just popped up. It says, do you have recommendations on eating timing between meals and time between eating and sleeping? I like to say I haven't ever seen anything come across my desk that says it has to be exactly this many hours and exactly this. When I go back to our initial webinar that we had where it talked about, really that everybody's a little bit different. So you kind of have to find what works for you. Again, a lot of times it can just depend upon your work schedule too. So I think the key thing is trying to find that consistency that works for you and trying to eat at regular times and try and stay in that routine. Avoid long periods of time so you can avoid that complete famish, because if you get to where you're completely, just super, super hungry, you're going to eat anything and everything in sight. So that's where smaller, more frequent eating up times for a lot of people does work better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that you kind of reiterated, Mary, about the wonderful element of these healthy eating patterns is that there is that flexibility. We're not saying, okay, Megan, you have to eat at this time. You should have this many number of meals. It isn't that focus. It's really thinking about some of those general guidelines and how that plays into your day-to-day life, because the more prescriptive we get, the more restrictive things are, and the more difficult it is for folks to be able to follow. Great questions today. Thank you all so much for joining. I can definitely stick around if there's any additional questions. Otherwise, we hope to see you next week for our final session for this series.
Let's see, Nikki, someone was having problems getting the survey link to load. Do you just want to put that in chat again one more time so they can try it?
I certainly can. And
Again?
I was wrong too. So it automatically brings you to like the second or third page, I think, asking about which webinar. So this is the truth about healthy eating patterns. That we had to select the series. That was my fault. I just saw another note in the chat. That it's the same link in that email. I'm not sure why it is bringing you to the end of the survey, or is it bringing you to the first question of the survey?
Looks like it's kind of what would be on the end of the survey.
I'm going to click in here again. Paste and go. I suppose I can stop recording this part. Nobody wants to listen to that. Oh yeah, just click the next arrow at the bottom of the screen. Then it should bring you to the rest of the